The sun had barely set over the Pacific as Elena Hartley, the former Duchess of Sussex, stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows of her villa, watching the golden hues of twilight play on the ocean's surface. It was supposed to be a quiet evening, a break from the chaos of her public life. The calm rhythm of the evening was soothing, a stark contrast to the whirlwind that had become her life. Elena took in the view, her eyes tracing the distant horizon where the ocean met the sky, feeling a rare moment of peace. In the far corner of the room, a phone buzzed insistently. Elena ignored it, her gaze still locked on the view. She had been trying to disconnect, to reclaim some semblance of normalcy. After months of constant media scrutiny, the pressure of being under the microscope had begun to weigh heavily on her, and she had been looking forward to a quiet evening of respite. But then the phone buzzed again, this time more urgently. Elena sighed, the moment of tranquility slipping away. She turned, walking over to the sleek, polished surface of the table where her phone lay. Her fingers brushed the screen, unlocking it with a quick swipe, only to be greeted by a flood of notifications. The messages came pouring in, texts, social media mentions, and links to news articles. At first, she scrolled without paying much attention, assuming it was just another round of gossip. But then her eyes landed on a video thumbnail. Her heart sank. There on the screen was the video. It was a grainy clip of her, laughing and dancing at a private event, a moment of unrestrained joy that had been captured by someone with a camera. Her body moved in ways that, in that moment, felt like a release, a way to forget the stress that had been building up. But now, it was all over the internet. The headline accompanying the video flashed across her screen. Elena Hartley's twerking video stirs up major controversy. Elena's mind raced. She had been at a private gathering with friends, away from the cameras and the watchful eyes of the public. She had let go of the weight of her title, of the expectations, even if just for a moment. She had danced, feeling free for the first time in ages. The video had been taken without her knowledge, and now it was everywhere. Leo Windsor, her husband, had been in the other room, tending to work. When he heard the soft click of the door as Elena entered, he looked up from his laptop. He could see the worry etched on her face even before she spoke. Without a word, she held up the phone and, his gaze fixed on the screen, the color drained from his face. Leo had been through countless media storms by her side, but this felt different. This wasn't just another tabloid story. This was something that could escalate quickly. He watched as the video played on the screen, the angles of Elena's body exaggerated under the harsh spotlight of the media. She had never intended for this to go public, and yet there it was, a moment of pure spontaneity, twisted into something far less innocent. Leo stood up abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. He walked over to her, the tension in his jaw evident. "We need to act fast," he said, his voice steady but firm. He had seen this before, the way the public could twist something innocent into a scandal. They couldn't let the narrative spiral out of control. Elena's throat tightened, the weight of the situation settling in her chest. She had known that the world would never let her live her life freely, but this was worse than she had imagined. The video wasn't just a minor slip-up. It was a symbol of everything the world had criticized her for, twisted into a public spectacle. And now, she had to face the fallout. As Leo paced the room, his mind already running through the possible responses, Elena felt a sinking feeling in the pit of her stomach. This wasn't just a personal embarrassment. It was an attack on her brand, her identity. She had spent years curating an image, trying to balance the expectations of royalty, the media, and the public. But now, all of that was being called into question with a single poorly timed dance. Leo stopped mid-step, his eyes locking with hers. "You didn't deserve this," he said, his voice low but intense. Elena looked at him, searching for some semblance of reassurance, but all she found was the same concern reflected in his eyes. As he pulled out his phone and began typing furiously, Elena sat back down on the couch, her mind racing. She could feel the cold weight of the public's gaze already bearing down on her. The video had spread like wildfire across social media, and within hours it was the top trending topic. Critics were quick to judge, and some even praised her boldness, calling it a sign of independence. But it didn't matter. It wasn't about the praise, it was about the judgment that would follow. The phone buzzed again. Another notification, this time from Claire, their publicist. "We need a response," the message read. "The video's already gone viral. How do you want to address it?" Elena felt a knot form in her stomach. She was trapped between two worlds, the private life she longed for, and the public persona that had been forced upon her. No matter how hard she tried, the two would always collide. And now, she was caught in the middle of it all, with no way to turn back. Leo glanced at her, his face unreadable. He was already on the phone with their PR team, his voice calm, as he began outlining the first steps of their response. Elena knew what was coming next. Statements, apologies, damage control. But what could she say? How could she explain something that hadn't been her intention? How could she reclaim control over her own story? As Leo spoke, Elena felt her heart beat faster, the weight of the moment pressing in on her. This was just the beginning. There would be no easy way out. But as she listened to him, she couldn't help but feel a spark of determination flicker inside her. Maybe, just maybe, she could turn this into something that was hers. Maybe she could take back control and show the world who she really was. The following morning, the sun rose over the villa, but there was no warmth to it. The warmth was gone, replaced with an icy silence that hung over the estate. Elena sat at the kitchen table, staring blankly at her phone. The notification feed never seemed to stop. The video had exploded overnight. Media outlets around the world had seized the story, and now every headline, every news piece, every tweet was about her. And it wasn't just the tabloids this time. It was everywhere. It was mainstream, and it was personal. Leo stood in the corner of the room, watching her. He could tell she was overwhelmed, that the weight of it all was getting to her. He had been through media storms before, but this one felt different. It wasn't just the public's gaze, it wasn't just the scrutiny. It was the fact that they were turning her most human moment into something else entirely. He couldn't help but feel the anger rise in his chest. It wasn't fair. He knew that, but he also knew that fairness didn't matter in this game. What mattered was perception, control, and reputation. He reached for his phone, scrolling through the growing list of notifications. The comments had turned vicious, cruel even. Some praised her for being bold, but most found the video distasteful, even scandalous. He gritted his teeth as he scanned through the hundreds of posts that ranged from jokes at her expense to condemnations of her behavior. With a deep sigh, Leo set the phone down. He turned to Elena, who was still sitting at the table, unmoving. He didn't know what to say. There was nothing that could undo the damage. All they could do now was try to manage it, try to contain the damage before it spiraled further out of control. "Claire's on her way," Leo said, his voice steady but strained. The PR team had already been alerted, but this was bigger than just a team. This was going to require action, real action. He had already spoken to a few of the top outlets who were eager for an exclusive, but Leo knew that those first statements had to be handled with extreme care. One wrong word, one wrong tone, and the scandal would blow up beyond repair. As he spoke, Elena finally broke her silence. "I don't understand how something so trivial can become this," she whispered, her voice barely audible. The words were lost in the endless barrage of digital noise, but to her, the impact was immense. She had been reckless, yes. She had let her guard down, had done something private, something spontaneous. But none of it had been meant for the world. to see. None of it had been meant to be dissected, criticized, torn apart. It wasn't even a big deal in her eyes, just a moment of fun. Yet here she was, caught in the crossfire of a media frenzy that would likely last for days, if not longer. Leo's thoughts mirrored hers. It was absurd. The video, the outrage, the debate, it was all overblown. But he understood why it mattered. They had built a brand together. The narrative had been carefully crafted over years. The public perception of Elena had always been one of grace, elegance, and poise. This video, this moment of joy and freedom, threatened to unravel it all. The weight of that realization was heavy. He walked over to her, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. "We need to stay ahead of this, Elena," he said. His voice was calm, but it held an edge of urgency. "The media's not going to let go, so we can't afford to wait. We need to control the narrative before it spins even further." Elena nodded slowly, absorbing his words. She knew what needed to be done. A carefully worded statement was already in the works. It would address the issue without offering an apology, without caving in to the public's need for contrition. It would be a declaration of her right to live freely, to be herself without the pressure of living up to expectations that no one should ever have to meet. But Elena knew that even that wouldn't be enough. The damage had already been done. The narrative was out there. People had already made up their minds. She had been reduced to a headline. A single, short moment in time had become her defining story. The doorbell rang, and Leo walked toward the front door to greet Claire. As soon as Claire entered, Leo could feel the weight of the situation intensify. The PR expert's usual composure was replaced by a sense of urgency that matched his own. Claire wasted no time in getting to the point. "We have to release a statement," she said, holding up her tablet. "But we can't just acknowledge it. We need to show strength. The public wants to see you take charge of the situation, not backpedal. They want to see someone who owns their mistakes, but also refuses to be defined by them. That's what we need to portray." Eleanor's mind raced. Strength. That was the key, wasn't it? She couldn't allow herself to be diminished by this. The world would always judge her, always find something to critique. But she had built her life, her career, her identity with purpose. She wouldn't let a single moment undo all that. She stood up slowly, her body still aching from the emotional weight, but her resolve hardening. She wasn't going to apologize for dancing. She wasn't going to apologize for being human after. A long pause, she finally spoke, her voice steady and filled with determination. "Let them say what they want. I won't apologize for being myself. We'll handle this the way we always do, together. But no apologies. Not for this." Leo exchanged a glance with Claire, and they both nodded. This wasn't just about managing a scandal. It was about positioning her as the woman she was, someone who had nothing to hide, who was not afraid to stand up for herself, even when the world was ready to tear her down. Later that afternoon, as they worked on drafting the statement, Elena found herself looking at the video once more. This time she wasn't angry. She wasn't ashamed. She watched herself, carefree and unburdened by the expectations of others. And for the first time since the storm had begun, she felt a flicker of something else. Pride. She had let go. She had danced. And no one could take that away from her. The days that followed were filled with a whirlwind of media appearances, interviews, and statements. The video was dissected from every angle, analyzed by experts who debated her intentions, her movements, and her message. But throughout it all, Elena remained unwavering. As her public persona shifted, so did the media's response. The criticisms slowly started to wane. The storm had not passed completely, but there was a shift in how the public viewed her. The scandal, as it turned out, was less about the dance and more about her response. And by refusing to back down, Elena had begun to redefine herself, not as a figure beholden to the expectations of others, but as a woman who was free to be herself, flaws and all. The day after Elena's bold statement, the whirlwind only intensified. The media had been clamoring for answers, dissecting every word, every pause, as if Elena's entire future hung in the balance of one short speech. The press had become relentless, each headline turning a little sharper, a little more accusatory. The world was waiting for her next move, eager to see how she would respond. Leo stood by her side, watching the media machine churn through the storm. He had known this moment would come. He had known that their carefully crafted public image would be tested. What he hadn't prepared for, however, was how it would feel to watch Elena, the woman he loved, become the subject of such a global debate. That morning, they had been woken by a phone call from a major network. A live interview was scheduled for that afternoon. The network wanted a response, one that would calm the storm, one that would assure the public that Elena was in control of the narrative. Leo knew what that meant. More interviews, more headlines, more scrutiny. But Elena was resolute. She was ready to face the storm head-on. Leo paced through the villa, the weight of their situation pressing in on him from all sides. He knew that the interview would be pivotal. He couldn't afford to let Elena stumble, even though he could see the exhaustion in her eyes. She had been carrying this burden alone, feeling the pressure of the world's judgment, and now it was time for her to take control of the media, of her own story. She had to show the world that she was no longer the woman they thought they knew. In the quiet of their villa, Elena stood before the mirror in their bedroom, taking a deep breath as she adjusted her outfit for the interview. The soft fabric of her dress clung to her body in a way that made her feel powerful, even though she wasn't sure how powerful she felt inside. She reached up to fix her hair, her fingers trembling slightly. She caught her reflection in the mirror. It was not the reflection she had come to expect. Gone was the image of the poised and polished woman the world had created for her. The reflection staring back at her was raw, a woman ready to reclaim her voice, to be seen for who she truly was. Leo knocked softly before entering, his eyes scanning her face. He could see the emotional weight she was carrying. He knew that beneath her composed exterior she was struggling. He had never seen her like this before, not even during the most difficult moments of their journey together. This scandal had shaken her, but it had also awakened something in her, something he hadn't seen in a long time. It was a flicker of rebellion, of defiance, and that, he realized, was the key to their success. She had to embrace that fire within her. "Are you ready?" Leo asked gently, his voice steady. Elena nodded, but her gaze remained fixed on her reflection. "I don't think I've ever been more ready for anything in my life," she whispered. Leo stepped closer, placing a hand on her shoulder. He squeezed it gently, offering the comfort of his presence. He didn't need to say anything more. She knew he believed in her. She knew that they were in this together, no matter how hard it got. The interview began, and as the camera lights blinked to life, the weight of the world seemed to fall upon Elena. The host, a well-known figure in the entertainment industry, greeted her warmly, but the underlying tension was palpable. The question was inevitable. How do you respond to the controversy surrounding your video? Elena took a deep breath, collecting herself. The public was waiting for her to apologize, to show contrition. But that wasn't her truth. That wasn't the message she wanted to send. She couldn't pretend to be sorry for something that wasn't wrong in her eyes. She began speaking, her voice calm but firm. "I've learned that sometimes the world demands perfection from you, and when you slip, when you make a mistake, they are quick to tear you down," she began. Her words were measured, but there was an underlying strength in them. She was speaking for herself now. What happened in that video was a moment of spontaneity. It was a private, personal moment that was captured, and now the world is trying to make it into something else. The host nodded, appearing to listen intently, but there was a subtle skepticism in his eyes. But many people see this as an example of someone who is supposed to be a role model, someone who represents grace and dignity. Wasn't this a misstep? Elena's expression remained neutral, but the corner of her lips curled into the slightest smile. The question didn't rattle her. If anything, it only reinforced her resolve. Grace and dignity do not mean silence. They do not mean living in fear of judgment. I don't have to be perfect to be worthy of respect. And I don't think anyone should. Leo, watching from the sidelines, could see the shift. This wasn't the Elena they had once tried to control. This was Elena, unapologetic, owning her story. The media had expected her to break down, to apologize for simply being herself, but she wasn't about to let that happen. She was in control. Now. The interview continued, with the host asking more questions about the video, the aftermath, and the public's reaction. Elena answered each one thoughtfully, never losing her composure, but always maintaining her stance. She wasn't asking for forgiveness, nor was she apologizing. Instead, she was asking for understanding. After a few moments, the host shifted gears, diving into more personal territory. You've been in the public eye for years now. How has this scandal changed your perspective on fame and the expectations that come with it? Elena paused, her gaze drifting momentarily to the floor before returning to the camera. This was the heart of the matter, the question that had been eating away at her for months. She had lived under the constant weight of public expectation, and for so long she had tried to meet those expectations. But now, she saw things differently. I've spent too much of my life trying to be someone I'm not for the sake of public approval, she admitted, her voice growing softer, more reflective. I've tried to please people who don't even know me, and I've sacrificed pieces of myself in the process. But I'm done with that. I am who I am, and if that's not enough for some people, then so be it. But I refuse to live in a cage of perfection anymore. There was a moment of silence after her words, the host seemingly struck by the raw honesty in her voice. The camera lingered on Elena's face, capturing the vulnerability and strength that radiated from her. Leo could see that she had won. This wasn't just about managing a scandal anymore. It was about redefining who she was. The media had expected her to crumble, to bow to their demands for contrition. But instead, she had built herself back up, stronger than before. The interview ended, and the cameras shut off. Elena sat back in her chair, her shoulders sagging slightly from the emotional release. Leo approached her, offering his hand. She took it, her grip firm as they walked out of the studio together. As they stepped into the cool air outside, Elena felt a weight lift off her shoulders. She had faced the storm, and for the first time in years, she felt free. The public's response was swift, but it wasn't as harsh as before. The backlash had started to fade, replaced by an unexpected wave of support. Elena's message had resonated with many, those who saw her not as a figure to be idolized, but as a woman with her own flaws, her own struggles, and her own strength. Elena knew this wouldn't be the end of the media scrutiny. She knew the public would continue to watch, to judge. But for the first time, she didn't feel afraid. She was ready to face whatever came next, not as a perfect image, but as herself. The days following Elena's interview were a strange mix of calm and chaos. The storm that had erupted from the twerking video began to settle, but the aftershocks were still reverberating through the media. The story had dominated headlines for what seemed like an eternity, and while the initial outrage had faded, the aftermath left Elena and Leo in a position neither of them had fully anticipated. The public was now divided. There were those who had supported her, applauding her for standing up for herself and reclaiming her voice. They praised her for being unapologetic, for showing the world that she was more than just a figurehead or a symbol of perfection. To them, she had become a beacon of empowerment, a woman unafraid to be flawed, to be human. But then, there were the critics, those who would never accept her freedom. They mocked her boldness, questioned her integrity, and criticized her behavior as unbecoming of a woman who had once been part of the royal family. The backlash was never truly gone, but it had morphed into something quieter, something insidious. The whispers of doubt were still there, lingering beneath the surface, waiting for the next mistake, the next slip. Despite this, Elena felt different. In a way, she felt lighter. She had faced the storm, and though the winds had howled, she had remained steadfast. She no longer cared to meet the public's expectations, at least not the ones that had been forced upon her. She was starting to accept herself in a way she hadn't allowed before. She wasn't just a public figure anymore. She was Elena Hartley, a woman with a past, a woman with flaws, a woman who had fought to find her own voice. Leo had seen the change in her. He could sense it in the way she carried herself, in the quiet confidence that had begun to seep into her every movement. It wasn't the same person he had met years ago, the woman who had been so concerned with pleasing others, with maintaining an image that wasn't entirely her own. Now, she was standing taller, her shoulders back, as if she had finally cast off the weight of other people's expectations. But he also saw the toll it had taken on her. There were days when Elena still seemed weary, the remnants of the storm, lingering in the form of tired eyes and quiet moments when the world was far too loud. Leo knew that, despite her newfound strength, the emotional scars of the past few weeks would take longer to heal. They were both still adjusting to the reality of a life where nothing was sacred, where every moment could be turned into a headline, a viral sensation. One afternoon, as they sat in the living room of their villa, Leo noticed Elena scrolling through her phone. Her brow furrowed slightly, her eyes scanning the latest round of social media comments. She had become more careful about what she read, but there were still moments when her curiosity got the better of her. He could see the tension in her shoulders as she absorbed the words on the screen, the praise mixed with the venom, the love wrapped in judgment. Leo sat beside her, watching as her fingers stilled on the screen. He could sense the inner conflict she was still grappling with. Elena had taken control of her narrative, but she was still learning how to live within it. He reached over and gently closed her phone, his touch a reminder that sometimes the world didn't deserve to be in her hands. "Elena," Leo said softly, his voice steady as he turned her attention away from the screen. "You've done more than enough. You've taken charge of this situation in a way I didn't even know was possible, but you don't need to keep carrying it all. The world will move on, and so should you." She looked at him, her eyes tired but filled with a quiet understanding. "I don't know if I'll ever stop carrying it," she replied, her voice quiet. "It's hard to let go of something that's been so defining for so long, but I'm trying." Leo smiled, his expression warm as he cupped her face in his hands. "I know you are, and you're doing it. You're moving forward, and that's all anyone can ask for. You don't have to be perfect, Elena. You never have to be." The weeks turned into months, and gradually, the public interest in the scandal faded. But in the quiet moments, Elena could still feel the weight of it, like an invisible cloak draped over her shoulders. Leo knew it wasn't something that would simply disappear. The aftermath of a scandal like this wasn't something that could be erased by a few months of calm. It lingered, subtly but undeniably. But in time, Elena began to find her rhythm again. She started focusing more on her personal projects, the ones she had put aside for so long. Her brand, as ever, had taken a hit, but it wasn't broken. She took a step back from the whirlwind of the media and poured her energy into the things that truly mattered to her. She collaborated with designers on her clothing line, hosted intimate gatherings for close friends, and began to work on a new book project. Slowly, but surely, she began to rebuild. And as she rebuilt, she found that the process wasn't as painful as she had feared. In fact, it was liberating. She was no longer tied to the expectations of a public that would never truly know her. She could finally be herself, not the figurehead or the symbol of perfection, but the woman who had gone through the fire and come out the other side stronger for it. Leo stood by her, as he always had, his unwavering support a constant reminder that she was never alone in this. They had faced the storm together, and now they were facing the future side by side. There was still work to be done, still a long road ahead, but Elena knew that whatever came next, she was ready for it. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with shades of pink and orange, Elena stood by the window of their villa, her hand resting on her growing belly. She was no longer the same woman who had danced freely in front of the camera. She had been tested, bent, and pulled by the forces of the world. But she hadn't broken. She had learned to embrace her flaws, to accept that she would never fit into the mold that had been created for her. And for the first time in a long time, Elena Hartley felt at peace. Leo joined her at the window, his hand finding hers. He didn't say anything. There was no need for words. The silence between them was comfortable now, filled with understanding and a sense of calm that had been absent for so long. They stood there, watching the world outside shift with the setting sun. It wasn't perfect, but it was theirs. And, in that moment, Elena realized that was enough. She had faced the storm, she had survived, and now she was ready to live her life on her terms. And that, she knew, was the beginning of something new, something beautiful, something real.